Okay, we've already started, so I'm pressing record. This is Rachel Nicholls, who's a patron of the London Singers Collective. Thank you for meeting me in your teaching studio. Now, we were just talking about how you kind of have to find your own way in this industry. You don't get told necessarily everything that you expect you should do after 20 years of being in the business. You find that you have had to discover a lot of it yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying when I look back and think what I didn't know and what I needed to know. And I think we can make the lives of young and inexperienced singers, I say young and inexperienced because some people come into the profession at a slightly later date.
That's true.
And so they're not always necessarily, 23 and straight out of music college, but we can make their lives immeasurably better and less stressful by helping inform them about the things we actually need to know as professionals surviving in the music industry.
And if you had to pick just a few bullet points that you think are essential from your own experience, that you just simply have to know before you go in, and if you don't, the learning experience can be quite painful, what would they be?
Absolutely. So I was just joking with you about how I go into the National Opera Studio every year and I do a talk about effectively how to be a professional and how to be a good colleague. And so the first thing I would say is that it's really important for you to be aware of the areas that you are in control of in the industry and the areas where you're not potentially as much in control and you need help. So with that in mind, it's really important to know how to build your support network to enable you to function as a competent member of the industry. And by that, I mean, some people are able to get a piece of music, sit down at the piano, learn it by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are naturally good linguists. If this isn't sounding like you, you're going to need someone to help you with those things. So we build our team of people, which sounds very, very precious, doesn't it? I have my team, my people, but you have your repertoire coach, and that might be one person, or it might be somebody that you go to for individual projects. Like you might pick someone who's really well known for being good at Rossini, or you might find that you want to go to someone who's an expert in Wagner if you're preparing something like that. You have your singing teacher who helps you with how to technically do things. You have your GP who you go to if you have a health problem. You have the pharmacist down the road who might help you with a less serious health problem. You might decide you have your ear, nose and throat specialist that you would go to if you have a serious problem. Your dentist. You have potentially someone you might want to run through drama things with. You might want to go to an acting coach for various things. But also, there's the nitty-gritty of the business. There's being sensible about your money and having a decent accountant. That's really important as well. Understanding how the tax system works, not just in the UK, but in different countries.
I think at all music colleges, and I think at the Guildhall possibly there's a great guy there called Trevor Ford, who has done that thing at the Guildhall for ages. But at the other colleges, I've not been aware of it, and it wasn't at the RCM when I was there.
It certainly wasn't a thing at music colleges when I was at music college, but I think we are living in more enlightened times now. There are people who can advise you on finances. There's also the business about getting an agent, which is getting increasingly difficult for young singers. And I would say we need to educate young singers about what an agent should be doing for you if you have an agent, and also how to survive in the business without an agent. Have you always had an agent, Jules?
Me, no. I have one at the moment who mainly does concert work, because that's what she knows, that's where her connections are, and she's good at that. I was with one before that who did mainly opera, and then before that I wasn't with anyone. And I just worked harder to get the work myself, and as a result, I learned more about how the industry works. And I think, I mean, obviously, if you have the choice to go, if you get an offer from IMG or Asken Holt, then you're like, yes, I'd be silly not to, because they have all the connections I can need. But that also doesn't mean that you're going to let them do all the work.
No.
You have to be proactive, you have to do it. And if you happen for a while to not have an agent, then it is your chance to develop professional business connections yourself, and that can be really useful.
I really love how you're looking at that as an opportunity. And certainly, my husband went into the opera industry as somebody without a kind of traditional background, as in he had studied something completely different before. He went into the industry at a slightly later age, and he just looked at it and went, agent, handing over 15 to 20% of everything I own. I don't want to do that. So he decided there and then that he wasn't going to have an agent.
And did he not at all?
He briefly had a flirtation with a small agency because I was represented by them many, many years ago. He gave it, I think, 6 months before he said, absolutely not, this isn't working for me, because he didn't want to hand over the reins of his career. As if he had developed all of these skills and all of these personal relationships with the opera companies, particularly in the UK. And he felt that he believed in his product more and was therefore better at selling it. So
that's so important. You have to be able to build your own product.
Yes.
And you cannot expect an agent, no matter how good they are, to do that all for you. That's not actually fair on them.
No.
Because they have possibly 20 singers that one bloke has to look after. They simply can't do that. So you have to take responsibility for it.
You do. And it's about, with this support network or your team, it's about knowing who is for what. So although my agent is really, really good, and I'm really happy with my agent. I'm looked after by Jonathan Groves and Helen Ho at Groves Artists, and they are absolutely fantastic. Now, Jonathan and Helen are really knowledgeable about repertoire, but I wouldn't rely on them to advise me about repertoire. Really, that's a level of responsibility they shouldn't be taking for me. I need to know myself whether I'm able to sing something and whether that's a good idea. And that's a conversation I would have with my coach and with my singing teacher, for example. But planning long and medium term in terms of the trajectory that your career is taking, that is something for an agent to be involved with. Yeah. And it's important that you communicate really well with your agent. And I would say having a good agent, as you say, if you get the chance to go to a really prestigious agency, it would be silly not to take that chance. Having a quality agent, you might be happier with a small agency where you feel you are individually looked after. You might feel you're better off in a big agency because they represent a lot of very well-known people. If one of those people isn't available, you're likely to be bumped up the list and get some chances that way. There are pros and cons, but what I would say is you've got to be happy with your agent, and they've got to be a good agent for you at the stage you're at. And often it's better not to have one than to have one who's not doing what you need.
That's true, because I think things never stay the same. A good agent will help you build something, and an agent who's not doing it for you you'll go in the other direction.
Yeah.
Things never stay the same. They either get better or they get worse.
They do.
It's up to you to monitor that.
Right.
So to know when to say something and thank them for all the work they're doing if they're helping you make something of yourself. Yeah. Or if it's going in the opposite direction and you feel that they can't give you the attention at that moment, then that's also up to you to say, thank you, I've just got to do my own thing for now.
And I think that's very much the case with coaches and teachers as well, isn't it? When you're working well together and things are going well, that's brilliant. When you start to feel that you need something else, sometimes, even if you've had a long and loyal relationship with a singing teacher, after a few years, it might be time to get some input to somebody else. But if you manage those relationships well and honestly and carefully, sometimes you might want to go back. It's not good to burn your bridges, so you might want to check in with the teacher that's looked after you for many years, having gone out and experienced some other things, just to check that everything's still okay. And I am a firm believer that a lot of this industry works best when people are considerate and honest, but also when they don't destroy relationships. You know, it's not like getting a divorce from your singing teacher. No, you can leave on good terms.
I learned that lesson at college. I was with actually after college, I'd been with a guy who was very good. I'd been with him for 3 years, and I felt like I could predict what he was going to say every time I sung something. And so I thought, and I was really nervous about talking to him about it, and I think he could tell something was up. And so he prompted me to talk about it, and I said, oh yeah, I think I ought to, I know what you're going to say, I think I ought to move on. And he was like, that's fine. I was like, oh really? And he was like, how long have you wanted to move? And I was like, 6 months. He was like, the thing is, if you don't say something, I don't know. You know, it's like, oh yeah, that's true.
So I've always said I bless switchers, because actually, you know, if I'm not giving you what you need the input from somebody else.
Yeah.
Or at least you need to tell me that I'm not giving you what you need. Because in the first instance, I'd advise any singer, talk to your teacher. They might agree with you. They might say, yeah, I haven't got anything to say to you anymore.
Yeah.
I'm trying to fill these hours that we've booked in with helpful advice, but I've kind of run out of things to say and you need the input from somebody else.
Yeah.
So they might be desperate to get rid of you.
And if you're already an adult by the time they're teaching you, I think they will expect you, as you're the one paying for their time, to say, I'll try something different for now.
Yes.
They're not, it's not really their responsibility. They're there to deal with you as a singer, but they're not there to manage your own insecurities about whether you have the courage to say it's time to move on.
Absolutely. So. And you know, I think we have moved in our teacher-student relationships, certainly at conservatoire level and beyond. We've moved from a teacher-centric model to a more student-centric model. And I think that's really, really good. And what I like my students to tell me is what they would like out of the session. I find that really helpful. Because then I can actually try and deliver what they feel they need. And sometimes I may feel that what they need isn't what they think they need, and then we can discuss that, and I can say, yeah, you say that you want me to help you with your high notes today. That's a very common request, but actually I think we need to work on this particular thing in your middle voice, because that's actually going to underpin the structure of what's happening further on. You know, that's just an example of something where there can be an open dialogue, which I think is very healthy.
This kind of, I want to ask something about your singing, because when we were singing together in the church choir, you were very well known internationally for singing Baroque music.
Yes.
Now you're very well known internationally for singing Wagner.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, when we were singing in the church choir, we all thought, Rachel's got one hell of a voice. It's enormous. So did you always have that voice, and you were having to hold back, or you were just biding your time, or did it change and we were just hearing something that was kind of coming gradually at the time?
I think I went to music college with a really big, sizable voice, and with this slightly messed up desire to sing really nice Baroque music, like my friends who were better at doing that than me, and I perceived that as a thing I couldn't do naturally, that I really wanted to be good at. I think I'm just a little bit perverse in that way. Now, I was quite well known for singing Baroque music, but the thing I could do was control my vibrato.
Okay.
So when a conductor, for example Roger Norrington, would ask me to sing something completely straight with no vibrato, I had no problem doing that at all, because I had sung at St James's, where our director of music liked us to sing really, really straight.
Did he?
Yeah.
I think I must have selectively not.
Did you miss the memo?
I did, yes.
Well, again, this is a thing that's quite common, is that the girls have to sing really straight,
yes.
but the men are allowed to sort of do what they like. So yeah, I developed this way of holding my sound very, very straight and just singing on the blade on the front, and that worked for Baroque music, and people liked what I did. I was doing an impression of the people who were very good at it, but my impression was slightly louder than the people who were very good at it. So if you had a big venue, for example, some of the concert halls that I've sung in Japan are really big venues, and you want someone who can be heard easily, but that can sing very straight, or slightly lower repertoire. So I specialised in doing the second soprano roles in the Malbach Magnificat and the B minor mass, where it just sits a little bit lower, and it's a little bit high for most mezzos, it's a little bit low for most sopranos, and I was like, hi, pick me, I can do that.
Right. So you kind of found a niche.
Yeah, I found a little niche with my Baroque singing, and on the side I was developing my opera voice, but I had a lot of little tiny roles at Covent Garden when I first left college. I was still doing the church job where we were singing together then. Singing, you know, normally with vibrato. And then there came a period in my life where they said, you're not really quite right for this. You're not right for these lighter soprano roles. You're not really a mezzo. We don't really quite know what to do with you. You need to look at bigger repertoire, but you can't do that in these big prestigious places. You need to go away and learn your trade doing something else. And I think over a period of years, I paid my mortgage doing the straight singing and was developing the other craft on the side.
Okay.
And then when I was 35, I auditioned for Helmwege in Die Valkyrie, which is the top Valkyrie, and she gets to sing Brynhilde's battle cry.
Okay.
With all the scary top notes that I won't do because of broken microphone. And for the first time, instead of saying, somebody said, yes, great. Could you just sing this bit? Could you just read this bit for me? Could we see where your voice is in? And I was booked on the spot for this thing. And people started to get really excited about the potential Wagnerian sound. And I was a little bit clueless. I mean,
Really?
I'd made my Covent Garden debut as one of the Flower Maidens in Parsifal, but we'd only really been in our scene. I hadn't really, I'd listened to some of the rest of the rehearsals, but Wagner wasn't really on my radar.
Okay. It's funny because I remember one moment where Paul Plummer, who's obviously a very good friend of yours, and I did Duke Bluebeard's Castle with him last year, and we were singing Hallelujah's chorus at St James's, Sussex Gardens, and we were all really going for it because there were only 5 of us in the choir, and we were all just like, okay, nobody can hear anything because Rachel was 10 times louder than everybody else, and Paul went, yeah, she'll sing Wagner in the future. So I just assumed you guys had talked about this and that was where you were heading.
No, I don't know. I always knew I could make a lot of noise, but everybody was a bit kind of about it most of the time, and with good reason.
We loved it. We went like that. We were like, keep going.
Right, it's a bit scary, and I was often, as a young singer, people say, don't push, and actually I wasn't pushing.
You weren't pushing.
It's just the amount of sound that came out when I opened my mouth. And I just think I had a bit of an unusual instrument.
Okay.
So yeah, it was more of a surprise to me than perhaps just to other people that I ended up doing Wagner. What I would say is doing Wagner is exactly the same as doing anything else. People have this big mystique about Wagner, you mustn't touch it too soon. And that's sensible because any big repertoire with a hefty orchestra you shouldn't touch too soon. But all the same rules apply. You have to work out whether you can sing it safely within what you can do comfortably. If the answer is yes, go ahead. You'll have to build your stamina because the roles are very long, because the operas are very, very long. I'm fortunate, touch wood, I'm blessed with quite a robust instrument, so the stamina's never been a problem for me. And because it's something my voice is suited to, it doesn't tire me to do it, if that makes sense.
Well, it's funny, John Tomlinson, who's going to be the next person I interview at the end of the month, he said the same thing. I had some sessions with him and he said, the thing you've got to understand is it's just good singing. If your voice is suitable for this, you sing well, it'll be fine. If it's not suitable and you should be singing Handel, doesn't matter how well you sing, it won't be fine.
This is absolutely precisely right. And it's why, for example, I get extremely fatigued singing some things that other people find easy. And it's because my voice doesn't naturally want to do that. So therefore, it's exhausting because I'm holding something in, I'm working at a slightly too high or too low tessitura, maybe. There are many, many reasons why I would find singing a bit of Bellini or Donizetti very exhausting, whereas Wagner, most singer goes on for 5 hours. Really, I'm fine. The longest role I sing is Isolde, and I don't have a problem with that. The most athletic role I sing is Electra. That's a much shorter opera, but it's very, very intense and it's very physical singing. I don't get tired by that either. Okay. So it's horses for courses.
Yeah. When you were making this change, who were the pivotal people who helped you make that transition?
So the person who recognised that I was going to be a runner, I was going to be able to take it and run with it, was Anthony Negus, who probably knows more about Wagner than anybody else.
He's amazing, isn't he? Yeah.
He also has a particular knack for spotting Wagnerian talent amongst people who haven't done it before, and he's very, very. he's so brilliant at working with singers and helping them inhabit these roles, because he has worked with so many singers on the roles, but he knows the operas so well. So Anthony was absolutely key. Through him, I was put in touch with Malcolm Rivers, who runs the Master Singers charity, and they were instrumental in putting me together with Dame Anne Evans, who I still coach with. I think she's absolutely amazing. She's very strict. She's extremely demanding about what she thinks is good and what she isn't, and she's pretty much always right. I think she's a legend and absolutely wonderful. And I'm a very different instrument to her, but I hope I'm learning to have the same kind of approach to the detail of the music and the text that she has.
Right, okay. So is that interpretation or technique or a mix?
It's a mix. So Annie won't tell me how technically to do something, in that she won't say, I need you to lift your soft palate a little bit higher here, or sing with a slightly higher larynx position. In fact, she'd never ever say that. But she does talk to me about breathing. She does talk to me about colour, and she does talk to me about what sound she wants, and then she leaves it up to me to work out technically how to do that. And if I can't, then I go to my technical singing teacher about how to do that. And my technical singing teacher, I have two. I work with Anne-Marie Speed, who works an awful lot with West End singers. She teaches on the musical theatre course at the Royal Academy of Music. I find her immensely helpful about opera, and she has helped me to learn to use my voice more safely and more efficiently, and to have a far greater access to a range of colour since I started working with her.
Seeing as she's not really in the opera world, how did you find her?
I found her because I did Estill voice model training as part of what I wanted to improve my skill set for teaching cross-genre at the University of Huddersfield. And I went on the course initially thinking I will find out more about teaching musical theatre, and I ended up thinking this is teaching me a lot about how to use my own voice. And during the course of that course, I worked with Anne-Marie and I worked with Paul Farrington. And I then did the course again, but in between that, I originally approached Anne-Marie because I wanted to improve my diction. I'd been booked to do a lot of work at English National Opera. I had been criticised in the past for not being very clear with my text, and I thought, I want to sort this out. I want to know what's going wrong here. Why am I able to sing clearly in German, but my English diction's not particularly good? And I went into my original session with Anne-Marie thinking, this is all going to be about diction, and she had so much to say to me about using my voice better.
Okay.
And I just find her super helpful, and it's about finding the right person for you. That's the thing. So I don't need to go to somebody with an enormous reputation for teaching Wagnerian opera singers if the person who works best for me is somebody who teaches people in top West End shows.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, but people in those shows have to sing extraordinarily well as well.
Voice on demand, 8 shows a week.
I mean,
we would never sing back to back unless there's an emergency. You know, it's a different. The muscles are doing different things with West End singing, but it's good singing is good singing. It's what John Tomlinson says. Good singing is good singing.
Yeah, that's very true. I seem to remember that you're a good instrumentalist as well. Or you were. Well, I mean, none of us play on instruments anymore because we're singers. But I remember
I was always a very mediocre violinist.
Okay.
Very
good pianist though.
I play the piano reasonably well, and that's really helpful for coaching now.
Okay, so do you come from a very musical family?
My father has the most magnificent tenor singing voice, but has never done anything with it because as soon as he realised that you had to practice, he lost interest entirely.
That's sometimes why people become singers.
Yes. My mum plays the piano, and she's got a lovely voice. It's not loud, but it's really beautifully focused. I think the tone of my voice is very similar to my mum's, but neither of them are what they would describe as, serious musicians. I started learning music because my granddad, who was blind, realised that I had perfect pitch when I was a baby. So
Okay.
I would sit with granddad and we'd listen to music together, or we'd watch something on the telly, and then he'd realise, because he had a very good ear, even though he was an untrained person, he said, she sings things back as a baby, you know, before I was 2, in the key that they are in. And that's how he described it. And he said, you have to get her to learn a musical instrument. So my granddad died when I was 5, but the seeds had been sown by then. And my parents let me learn the recorder.
It just takes one person to
learn the
pick up on
violin,
something.
and I did have a peculiarly developed ear as a child.
Okay.
Because most children don't start singing in tune till they're 5 or 6.
Yeah. So I've got a daughter who's 6, and she sings everything back in the same key. But I think
watch out.
But I think when they're that age, it's just a very good. It could be just a very good sense of relative pitch.
It's possible.
But I mean, I know fantastic musicians with perfect pitch. In fact, there are an alarming number of people in the choir I sing in at the moment who have perfect pitch, which is great because I can just listen to them and everything's banging.
Yeah. The thing is, it's not always a huge advantage. It's a peculiar, like I say, I'm allowed to be rubbish at everything else because I have the notes in my head and that's my superhero skill. It's come in very useful over the years for last minute emergency jump-ins.
When you were doing lots of Baroque repertoire, presumably that's
I had
415.
it was like a capo in my head. I had a Baroque setting.
How long did you take to learn to do that?
All I would have to do is to turn up and hear the strings tune.
Really?
And that would be me. Right, so this is a ridiculous story. I was asked to do Nerone in L'Incarnazione di Poppea at 465, which is up.
Yeah, nearly upper quarter tone.
It's a bit more than that. So it's upper semitone from 440,
okay.
Effectively. So I wrote my music out up a semitone.
The whole thing?
Yeah, the whole thing. When I got to Japan to start rehearsing, it didn't sound like modern pitch up a semitone because I'm used to the sound of the authentic instruments. It sounded like Baroque pitch up a tone, so I had to write it all out again.
Oh no! It's such a mind bend.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. I just couldn't get it into my head. So I was weird about pitch. The worst times when I had to record a Bach cantata with a mean tone organ. So I'm very much in equal temperament, or I can manage velotti, but I'm not good with mean tone because I had to write little up arrows and little down arrows over all of the notes, and I think in the end they didn't use the recording and they got someone else to do it because it's never seen the light of day. But Masaki Suzuki is such a lovely and polite person. He would never dream of telling me that I was too awful.
No, but I think the fact that you can do that and that it's caused you problems is not, you're not just somebody with perfect. This is what I think about the singers at my church in Marylebone. They're not just singers with perfect pitch. They have perfect pitch. They are also extraordinary musicians as well. And if you have both, I mean, that's a real gift.
Yes, and you sometimes find in the world that we inhabit, you get people who are incredible singer musicians, but they don't necessarily have enormous voices.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. And you find people with the most fabulous, wonderful voices and an instinctive or learned a brilliant control over those voices, but they might not have the same musical background or even be as skilled.
Yeah.
You know, even if they have.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to be born with it all, or even have it all by the time you're having a good career. It's you play to your strengths.
Absolutely, and be aware of where you need help. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I think being able to identify your weak spots and admit them will not just improve those weaker areas, but will also make your good things even better as well. Because you come with a whole package.
Definitely.
And I think it's really important for people to realise that you're not just a loud voice.
No.
There are other things that you have to have as well.
And certainly with my background as, you know, an instrumentalist, I played in youth orchestras a lot, and I was a fairly decent pianist. When I first started doing opera, I was really not very confident on stage. I found the acting side of things, as someone who'd come up with a real sort of background of choral music, I found actually acting quite difficult. Now, fortunately, I started having a go at it quite young because I joined a youth opera group when I was in my teens, which I actually help run now, which is nice. And I had a lot of good help there, but that was definitely a journey that wasn't anywhere near completion by the time I went to music college. And just if anyone's going, I can't do this thing, I'm weak at this particular area, I thought it was an area of real weakness, and now I think I'm probably right in saying I'm known as a good singing actor. You know, so in fact, one of my major strengths now is what I do on stage, and that for me is the thing in a way I'm most proud of, because it was something I was rubbish at.
Right. Were you encouraged just to get on stage and have a go? Because I find if you're working with a company which is really supportive, even though something might slightly terrify you, you just say, well, I'm in the best possible place to have a go, so I'm just going to jump on stage, and anything which doesn't go well, they're going to help me with, so it's fine.
Yes, and it's being in a place where you feel safe enough to do that and to let go of your inhibitions and to be brave, and that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think it's really good when the company you're with makes it obvious that at the beginning, certainly, there are no mistakes. We're just trying things.
We're trying stuff out.
Because even people who are naturally fantastic actors, they don't get on stage and do everything right first time.
No.
Because even if it's really good, it might not be what the director needs from you at that moment. So if you can just get the chance to try things 20 times, you know, very quickly, get through all the iterations, and then you just get going and you forget that you were scared in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's really helpful.
And turning up on the first day of rehearsals with some ideas of your own is really a really good idea, because sometimes you work with the sort of director who says try something out before they give you any input. So if you're someone who's not particularly confident on stage, just having, you know, watch a few videos of the opera you're going to be in, get some ideas, or, you know, you might be somebody who works really well with text, get some inspiration from what you're working with, and then you have something to offer. And I think if you offer something, usually people will be really happy to take that and either say, thank you, actually I want a different idea, but because you've offered something already, it shows that you're entering into the creative process.
Yes, definitely. Well, something is always better than nothing.
Definitely.
I think you've got to
standing there going,
yeah. Then it's really obvious that you might not have done all the work you possibly should have done before you got there.
Yeah, I mean, I had a brilliant experience at Scottish Opera when I was doing the Flying Dutchman there, where we turned up and Harry Fair, who was a fantastic director, made us do in the first afternoon the research that he hoped we would all have done before we turned up. And it was kind of supervised homework, which was brilliant. Everybody other than me had the fishing industry in 1970 in Aberdeen as their main focus, and mine was autistic spectrum disorders.
Right.
Okay, so at that point I thought, I think I know where you're going with my character here.
Yes.
But it was really, really good, and I think that experience did teach me a little bit about what sort of research to do and what sort of conversations it's useful to have with directors before you turn up.
See, I think it would be really good if young singers in like a formal education, so music college, university, any kind of singing thing that they've got themselves involved in, it would be really useful to know that. How do I research?
Yes.
The opera, the characters, where that material comes from. Was there a play before it? Even if you don't use it, even if you end up just sticking to the opera score, knowing how to research is really important.
It really is. We were actually given quite a lot of help with that by Tuti Masson at the Royal College of Music. She was our acting teacher in the first year.
Brilliant.
And one of the things we had to do was we had to research a role properly, and we were given that as a little mini project, and that was really helpful.
Okay.
And I personally felt empowered by the knowledge, even as you say, if you don't end up using it.
Well, so I just finished, well, not just, a couple of months ago, I finished Thomas Allen's autobiography, and he says, I know everything about this opera. I don't use 90% of it, or I don't. Maybe he doesn't realise he's using it. I think he probably is. He's pulling parts here and there, and it all goes into creating an immensely convincing character.
Yes, and it's very three-dimensional, and it's very rich in terms of subtext.
Yeah.
I think I had some directors don't agree about doing a lot of research. I worked with somebody on a production of Macbeth in Germany who absolutely wanted nothing to do with the Shakespeare play at all. And I found that as an English person, I found that so difficult because, you know, Macbeth was one of my set texts at school, and I was so excited by doing the role. And the previous production I'd done, we'd taken all of the Shakespearean stuff into account. And then this guy was, no, we're just working with the words that we've got, and I don't want to know anything about the Shakespeare. And I found that really hard.
Okay. Did you end up bringing stuff in just because it was in your head anyway? Because you can't help it.
He had an antenna for it. So
Oh,
the
no.
minute
Okay.
he was like, no, it's not in the. He was really, but he was a man with a vision, and I respected that. Ultimately, he really wanted to go hardline along a particular route, and he wanted to do some stuff with the characters that is absolutely impossible if you take into account the Shakespeare.
Okay.
So the primary thing that affected me was that he wanted Lady Macbeth not to be a bad person. Okay. So I found that really hard, but ultimately I respected how hard line he was about his vision, and you know, had no choice but to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, after all, he is a director,
Yeah.
isn't he? Yes. And it doesn't mean just because it's not what you would do, it's not a good idea as well.
Well, exactly. This is the other thing with collaborating with other artistic people. We don't have to do our thing. Sometimes we can do their thing, and that's okay.
And it's really important to, I think, always, even if you don't agree, don't assume you won't agree or your idea is better. Because I found you could. So when I did the Bartok Opera last year, it was a young director, Eleanor Burke, doing it, and it became very clear in the first half hour that her ideas, I'm not sure I ever told her this, completely different to the ideas I had developed on the opera. But I just decided I'm going to listen to her because she's clearly very, very good. And I have to say, I learned so much. And I thought from there, okay, I'm going to go in with lots of ideas, but the first thing I'm going to do is put them aside so that I can actually take in other people's ideas. I think you learn a lot more that way.
The word I really liked that you used there was listen. And I think it's always good at the meet and greet, the model showing, to do more listening than talking, isn't it? Because
I think so.
yeah, it's very easy for us, particularly those of us with strong personalities who tend to be quite bossy, is to assume, right, no, my idea is much better, and blah, 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 and just go hard, you know, really play for getting your own way about things. And as you say, you learn so much more about the piece, about your character, and about different approaches if you actually take on board all of the hard work, preparation and talent that the other person has.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned Bedford Youth Opera.
Bedfordshire Youth Opera.
How long have you been involved with them on the staff side now?
On the staff side, on and off over the last 20 years. Well, in fact, yeah, I think there was 1 year where I was supposed to be the vocal coach, but I ended up having to be Majenka in the Bartered Bride because somebody else dropped out at short notice. So I had a foot in both camps, but that's probably 25 years ago now.
Okay.
Because I'm older than I think. But yes, but seriously, as the vocal director, which is now my current job title there, I have been involved with them for the last 3 years. And I run the company with the artistic director, Fred Broom, and the musical director, Richard Sisson.
Okay. You clearly really enjoy being involved with festivals as an educator and as a leading figure as well.
Yeah, I've just been appointed the artistic director of the St Endellion Festivals, so that's a very exciting new venture. Joint artistic director with Rachel Nicholls. So we are having a lovely time planning the summer festival at the moment.
Amazing.
We have exciting plans. So I think I love working with young people, with young singers, kind of trying to harness all of that enthusiasm, and my job as vocal director of the Youth Opera Group is to keep those voices safe and to help them to sing efficiently and well. So I take that responsibility really seriously. I also really like working with amateur musicians because I think amateur music is something that this country does really well, but I think we're in danger of losing it because of the horrible cuts to music education throughout the country,
Mm.
and I want to do my bit to try and keep that going with the youth opera. But also, I want to work with amateur choirs. I'm the singing teacher associated with the City of London Choir. In fact, I'm conducting a rehearsal. 1, 2, 3. And teaching them how to sing the Brahms Requiem as opposed to teaching them the notes to the Brahms Requiem. We're going to talk about how we sing as opposed to what we sing this evening. I'm working on some of their Christmas stuff coming up to the Christmas season.
Oh, is it that time already?
It is!
Oh, it's going to be never-ending Christmas carol services.
It definitely is. But I think amateur music making is really important. One of the nice things about St Endellion is that none of us get paid. So we all give our services for free. The choir pays a subsidised amount to come and participate in the festival, as do the orchestral musicians. And it does, to some extent, remind me every year of why I do this. I do this job because I love making music.
Right. Yeah. I think people don't realise. No, maybe that's unfair. They probably do. It's not said enough that nobody becomes a professional musician without first having been an amateur.
That's so true.
Musician.
I hadn't even thought
So
about that.
if we don't have this massive swathe of the population that is involved in amateur music making to good or slightly lower level, there's no training sector to then go on and have a professional industry.
Precisely.
So if you cut everything out at the schools, how are we going to have any amateur or professional musicians? It's insane.
There's a very, very powerful image of a symphony orchestra sat on stage and a school orchestra, and it says, in order to have this, you need to have this.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah. I think that's every part of it. Singers, instrumentalists, conductors, pianists. It would be a real shame if we just think. I think the STEM subjects are very important.
Yeah.
But they're not the only important subjects.
No,
and they're not
not.
necessarily the most difficult as well. It's like I remember doing A-level music and thinking, this is actually my hardest A-level. Well, I can do all the music stuff, but there's all the essays you have to write. It was like every subject in one.
And also, there was no getting away from the fact that with music, you had to do extracurricular activities.
Yes.
You just had to. You also had to go to lessons and do practice as well as homework. And it really was all consuming.
It teaches you a great sense of discipline and responsibility, and it gives you a great social network.
It does.
Most of my friends are from music things I've done throughout
Definitely.
over the years.
And the friends I made in Bedfordshire Youth Opera when I was in my 20s are still my friends. I mean, that's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
I think one of the pressures that's put on young people at school is that they sometimes are forced to choose between music and sport because you can't do both.
That's
and the emphasis, of the world is always on sport because if you don't do any, you die, So
I've never heard it put that way. Yeah, okay.
that's not original. My friend George Burrows, who is a professor at Portsmouth University, came up with that last week, and I really enjoyed it.
Do you mean like exercise?
Yeah,
Keep
exercise,
yeah.
If you don't do any exercise, you die. Whereas if you don't play the violin, probably it might not affect your life expectancy. It might affect your quality of life.
Well, people don't take that into account, do they? No. So, yeah, it's funny. I see music and sport is very similar in the way it gives you a big social network. It teaches you discipline. There should be ways for kids to be able to do both throughout school. I went to a school where you were forced to do sport, which was fine for me because I really liked sports, but there were those people
You
who
were very
didn't
good at football, weren't you?
Yes, but this isn't my interview, so
Okay.
we won't get into that.
I found out that nugget about you only the other week, and I was like,
Really?
what?
Who from?
Someone at one of your events. So
Was
you
it-
do know that he used to play football.
Was it Chris, your
Yes.
fellow panelist?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right. Anyway, we'll gloss over that for now and forever. You've thrown me off. What was I saying? Oh yes, so my school, they made everybody do about an hour and a half of sport a day, pretty much.
That's a lot of sport.
It was a lot of sport, and not everybody enjoyed it because not everybody enjoys sport. But when I then went into the kind of adult part of my life where people weren't doing sport every day, I noticed that I just think people are better off doing some kind of exercise.
I totally agree.
You know.
I find exercise is absolutely crucial for my own mental health, and also for, as you say, gives you a social network. Sometimes being a musician can be quite lonely because you spend a lot of time on your own practicing, other than when you're actually in rehearsals, but there's lots of months where we're not in rehearsals. And I find doing my sport every day with my sport friends makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And it's something you can take on tour with you.
Yes.
To keep yourself balanced when you're away from home, away from family, looking for ways to not spend all your money in cafes, wandering around
Absolutely.
cities that you don't know.
It's a good way of exploring as well. I suppose I'm referring mainly to cycling and running, but take your trainers.
Absolutely. On that note, shall we finish it? Because you've got to teach.
I
still.
do.
I can't see anybody out there, but it's nearly time. And thank you for watching, everyone. The wonderful Rachel Nicholls.
Thank
I'll now
you.
turn it off.